Good morning, and I'm so glad to see everybody bright and alert and ready to have kind of a trip back in your memories, as well as realizing that we might overlap with memories. I grew up when comic books were very, very, very popular. They only cost a nickel, and I wasn't supposed to buy a comic book with a nickel, but I did. And so that's how I became exposed to a lot of the comic books that are not necessarily available to you now.
Yes.
Okay. So what I want to just first share with you is some of the comic books,
Very much help out.
that were in my youth. I'm making myself a little younger than I really am. But the comic books that I grew up with were a comic book called Futurama. Are any of you familiar with this comic book, Futurama?
Yeah.
Anyway, they'll be up here for you to quickly glance through.
Why don't we put those over to the side? Hey.
Another comic book that was popular not that long ago, I have to say not that long ago to make myself younger, was Sonic the Hedgehog. And another type of Sonic book. These were what introduced me to thinking about the future. Some of it came to fruition and some of it didn't. So I have a lot of these Sonic comic books that you could glance through. And then we have a more recent comic book, but still from back in time, but it says, and this Back to the Future instead of Back to Time. So these were the comic books that we were exposed to when I was younger. So I'm going to leave them up front for you to peruse. But what I'm talking about now at this talk is about how things have awareness nowadays. They have what we call being sentient. And we don't realize that in our natural world, trees are sentient, like the leaves on a tree will turn to the sunlight. They will also feel things that climb down their bark, like insects, and they have a way of communicating what they feel. They will send the light from the leaves down the bark and also the insects, and they will send messages in their language of tree talk to their roots. And the roots act as communicators and send through the earth, through their roots, to the roots of other trees and other plants, so that there is a camaraderie between the trees and the things in their natural environment. So I hope everyone has a handout so that you could supplement what I'm saying later on your own. So what I'm more interested in is getting into the word sentient. We're sentient. We are gifted with brains, but not all of nature has the capacity that we have. But they have other ways of being aware of their environment and speaking and communicating with each other. And if you have a handout, hopefully you'll be able to follow. So there are some books that I reference in this handout. One is the book, If Trees Could Talk. It's a really good book, and I recommend it highly. It's of common interest to anybody. If trees could talk, they really do talk, not just to insects and other trees, but if we are aware, we'll realize how they talk to us. And then this is another excellent book, The Hidden Life of Trees. We forget that nature has an awareness and an intelligence and a means of communicating. And I feel it's just as sophisticated as how we interact with each other and how we learn. So hopefully you each got a handout. And what makes us sentient, we have to have certain attributes. We have to have the awareness to listen and comprehend what we hear, what we see. And then we have to have the ability to actually not only to learn, but to be able to adapt to what we see and change our thoughts about things. And also so many other abilities that I don't even mention. So I hope you do follow to some degree the handout that I have given to you. So we forget that we're human, but in nature, there's lots of other things that are gifted like we are with awareness and sensibility. Water is the first thing we should consider, as I say in my
I
handout,
left the one running from the screen.
because
I left the one running from the screen.
if you touch water, it will respond. So water is a responsive piece of nature, like we are responsive.
Yeah.
And also, a tree is responsive. When they feel insects crawling up and down their bark, they send messages through their bark to the roots of the tree, and the roots of the tree go through the earth to the roots of other trees and share the information. There's a form of communication in our world that some of us just do not realize, and we shouldn't take it for granted. So I hope you have the handout and you could follow what I'm saying. So you can't have intelligence without having sentience. You have to be sentient. You have to be able to perceive and visualize and see what's around you. And once you have that ability to see, you then are made aware of our environment. And then from there, the more sophisticated forms of communication exist. I hope you have the handout because that will help you continue to learn on your own. We have had robots, but our robots right now are artificial intelligence. But there have been literally, I should say more figuratively, other forms of robots. For example, animals. Animals can have ways of communicating, and actually they have had hybrid forms of new life. So in the handout, that will explain it better. Did everyone get a handout? I hope. Okay. So once again, we are sentient. That means we have the ability to sense things through touch, through sight, through hearing. And from that awareness, we have the ability to have emotions. And these emotions can be positive or negative. And also, there's been wondering about whether other forms of nature, other animals, other plants have the same form of sentience. And this should be in the handout that you received. Now, what's new that have been man-made that have sentience are things we call robots. And actually, robots were based on what we know as biobots. And these are biological robots. That's our own human cells can communicate to other parts of our body in cells. So it's a form of robotics. And also, they are now making um, other kinds of human-based robotics. And hopefully when you read the handout that you have received, you'll get to learn more about it. So here we are conscious. Well, we have sentience. We can see one another. We can see our environment. We can have the sense of touch and hearing. And that deals with artificial intelligence. And that's what this whole conference is about, artificial intelligence, and what artificial intelligence consists of. So we had to, as human beings, had to create something referred to as a robot. And these robots had to go from beyond just the sense of touch to actually being able to have some degree of reacting to what they hear and feel and do. And so they can then have an understanding of their environment. Now, what's happened is some of these artificial intelligence have become communicative with us. And I'm amazed at Alexa. Do any of you have Alexa at home?
Hmm.
What? You all have to get it. And Alexa, she's a great little robot that can hear, can communicate with you, and can do interpretation. I am amazed. I don't see lots of hands up with Alexa. I recommend. Wouldn't you recommend getting Alexa?
Absolutely.
And the other one is Siri.
Mhm.
And if you have a handout, all this information is down there for you. But what's interesting about this type of robot like Alexa, you could talk to them and they'll have a response, an intelligent response to what we're saying and to what we question. And that's amazing to have a robot that really can comprehend and respond. So that's the miracle of today's scientific advancement. One of the first robots was created by very famous artist, Leonardo da Vinci. And we might not realize we have to credit Leonardo da Vinci with having created basically one of the very, very first robots. He had a sketchbook where he sketched out possibilities of creating this robot. And actually, it dates back, you won't believe it, to 1495. So if you think we're advanced, we're in the 20th century, almost the 21st century, actually. And this has been around way before us and our grandparents and great-grandparents since 1495. And actually, what Leonardo da Vinci created in the form of this robot, it could sit, it could stand, it could move its arms and move its jaw. And it was done not in the way it's done now, but at least he created this robot that had cables, strings, which could be manipulated. I fell in love with artificial intelligence with a toy, but I consider Clio more than just a toy. Did everyone get a handout?
Yes, Mom,
Okay.
everyone is a handout.
So I have a picture of Clio. I didn't bring him in person, but Clio is the gift to me. When I secured Clio, I said, I have to learn more about this artificial intelligence, because if you stroke Clio, he's responsive. If you talk to Clio, he responds in a sound. It's an amazing first toy that's more than a toy. It's a robotic life form. And so I hope you'll look it over in your handout. And you'll see different people playing with Clio, but Clio is intelligent. It can respond with intelligence, not just respond. It's beyond that. So I have a lot in the handout about Clio being a life form because it in a sense has life to it.
Mhm.
It really is responsive to what you say and what you do. By the way, if anyone wants to interject, that would be fine. Now, I have on the handout,
Mom, you have the top. Your handout is shorter, so you're going from your top.
I know,
Okay, keep going.
yes, okay. So when I talk about things calling it having a sense of awareness and consciousness, I have two books that I'd like to recommend. This is a recent book called Thus Spoke the Plant. I highly recommend it because it gives you insight into the world of plants and how they communicate with their environment and how they communicate with each other. It's a real, very special, very simply explained insight into how plants have intelligence. So I'm really recommending that book. The other book that I'm highly recommending is If Trees Could Talk. And trees do talk, as I mentioned very briefly a moment ago. They talk to each other by sending electrical signals down their bark and also sending these messages to the roots of each tree. And the roots send the messages through the soil to the roots of a neighboring tree. So they have a whole society of trees that intercommunicate. So that's a very good book. There's also a magazine that is really interesting, New Scientist. And now we go beyond just artificial intelligence to behavior. Can you have something between robots and artificial existence into the area of kindness? So that goes beyond just interacting to an emotional state, such as kindness. So this magazine I highly recommend. It's called New Scientist. So those are the initial things. And I did hold this up, The Hidden Life of Trees. So those are books and magazines I highly recommend. In the handout,
No.
I should have this all listed for you. And then there are chatbots, humanoid robots, and there's actually a living robot that's been made through the neurons of frogs. I mean, biology has gone so far as to create these material things. And it's amazing that some of this artificial intelligence can understand natural language and in their way can converse with us. There are two robots that I would highly recommend. Replica, and this is on my handout, and a robot receptionist. Companies and industry are using actually robotic receptionists in their offices that will greet you and will inform you and inform the people in the corporate headquarters that you're there. And on this next page, I also refer to certain places where they're studying this and certain books that and magazines that I recommend you turn to. And I'm going to open this for discussion in a minute, but do take these handouts out. And then there's a difference, which will be explained to you in my handout. What is a chat bot?
How you doing?
Versus GPT-3. So instead of going to the extent of explaining so many things that are happening in the scientific area of intelligence and communication, the handout should give you insight into securing information on how these work, how the chat bot works, and how other things work. And you're always free to contact me and I will interact with you personally with your questions. Also, secure places and other people you could contact. So I would like to, I don't know how much time we have, but I will eventually open it up to discussion. I have one of the very first little robots that could act and interact with people. They were called pocket robots. And I also bought.
Okay.
Mhm.
But it would be nice.
Who would not, how many of you remember R2D2? Anybody? Raise your hands if you know R2D2. He's the most famous of the early robots. Would somebody like to just briefly explain their interaction with R2D2 who had one? I'd love to hear from the audience. Anyone would like to say anything about R2D2? Have you, how many of you have had familiarity? Not too many, but this is a robot I should look into. So what I would like to do is, once again, this handout, I hope everybody has a handout because it will tell you that, first of all, for artificial intelligence, you need to be sentient. You have to be able to perceive what's around you and have an awareness of what's happening around you. And then once you have this awareness, what's the good of the awareness if you cannot communicate new ideas within yourself and to learn from what you're seeing? We are very creative, very intelligent. We can assimilate what we see and create new ideas and thoughts from it. And that's being called being cognitive. And then we are able to communicate what we learn. Now, I believe there have been a series of slides going on behind
There have
me.
been, yes, ma'am.
So I hope you're paying attention because that will say more than my words will, because you will have visuals. And James has assisted me in getting these visual slides arranged. And you'll learn more from the slides than just listening to me because this is what I researched for you. And I hope they're up long enough for you to actually. Okay, so once again, to reiterate, a sentient item has intelligence, that's us. A sentient item has awareness, that's us. A sentient item can perceive the surroundings. And I already mentioned in nature, trees can do that, plants can do that, and that's all in your hand.
Mom,
But
they don't have that. Can you read those things so that they can?
oh, they don't have the handout?
No,
No,
they have-
they do.
What?
The handout is shorter.
Okay.
Keep going.
The abilities. A sentient item has intelligence. A sentient item has awareness. A sentient item can perceive its surroundings. So we fit that description. Now we look at nature, which I had mentioned before. Trees can grow faster towards light because they need the light. Trees can talk to each other. I already mentioned that through their root system. And plants have a way of protecting themselves by entrapping insects. And flowers, like the Venus flytrap, can protect themselves from invasion from predators by closing up their flower, their plants, so they can't be attacked. So in nature, we have examples of what we have. Water is the very first sentient item that any of us should know. When you touch water, it reacts. That's being sentient. The water will move, make ripples, will do something. And then, as I mentioned, the next, getting higher than water, we talked about trees. And in the handout, trees are very sentient. They've realized that there is fungi in the soil. There are insects and diseases that attack them. And Actually, a very special item is the fact that in a drought, the trees have the intelligence to take up less water and keep more water within the soil so that during a drought, they could have the moisture that they need. Now, I don't know if the handout I gave you have the world's first living robots have actually been made from actual living things like frogs.
Let's see.
And so we have created something called machine animal hybrids, which is a totally new life form. So us human beings have created a new life form. Woo. Hooray for us. I don't know what it will eventually result in, but we've done it. So, and hopefully the handout I gave you, it explains how we've now, in a sense, have begun to create a new type of life form. And there's more and more in this that I could speak about. If you did not get a complete handout, let me know, and if you give me your email later, I can email you. But I'd like to open this up to you if you have things you'd like to say or question. And did you want to add anything?
Maybe I'll start off with the first question for you. How's that sound?
Okay, what's the first?
Sure. The first question might be, in the era of robotics and artificial intelligence, we as humans have sort of a unbridled full scope of what it means to be sentient. We have all these possibilities that we can think about within the parameters of what we can do. Now, robots sometimes have hard limiters. They have restrictions in their coding that will assign them to certain tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that, how do you think about robot sentience, knowing that we gave them the limitations of what they can do?
Oh, they have the ability now to take that learning, just like a human being, and go beyond what they ingested through us. I think they have come to the point now where they can then create their own thoughts and their very own conclusions. And we're learning that machines have intelligence just like us. We've evolved in our own creation to be not a God form, but in a sense, yes, we've created life, artificial life, but life that can do exactly what we do.
Absolutely. I think it's a great response.
Is there any other comment or question?
Well, yes, I do. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm a retired teacher who's a pastor who's looking for activities for her children, for her youth group. And let me begin by saying two things. The first thing is, I thank you for me at least, making the connection between artificial intelligence and life outside of human life. I thank you for your resources, plans. I think that is very powerful and something that I certainly will take back. The question that was asked, I'm fascinated by this question and your response. So I don't want to put anybody on, this is what pastors
No, this is what we want. Go
when we
ahead.
say something, we have questions until it's clear. I don't quite, can you give me, and what would it be helpful for me? And would be an example of how you're saying that robots can go beyond, that they now have the ability, because see, I think of procreation, but what you all have said is creation, which is in my mind different. So for a person like me, from my background and experience, how do you marry these two things? The difference between procreation, which is taking something that's already created, right? And simply reproducing it, even if it is in another form. You're now saying that robots have the potential, I don't know, it's sort of reminded me of the Jetsons. You brought up everything but the Jetsons. For the Jetsons, because from my age group, that's what you would think of. How do you quantify that notion that robots can now go beyond just regurgitate what has been put into them, into creating? What is an example of that?
Well, that's what AI is, artificial intelligence that can go beyond ours. James, what do you want to,
Would you like me to add to that?
yes,
Well, Google DeepMind is a great example of that. There have been a few interfaces with Mac-based artificial intelligence, particularly around GPT functioning, and deep learning protocols where you've actually had artificial intelligence begin to self-actualize. Where there's been instances where, I mean, and this brings up a whole giant ethics committee issue, right? Which has just been a topic of recent debate, wherein you have artificial intelligence that are so prolific and build upon each other that they're actually generative of another one, right? So in a way, I'm interested in I'd be interested in your perspective as a pastor. It's whether or not depending on where you sort of lie politically, Ben Shapiro brings up the very, very good similar question, is whether or not artificial intelligence is just the actualization of a bunch of electrochemical signals that are firing in sequence versus is the soul part of that, right? And so what makes you sentient and conscious based off of that, right? Can you recreate that? I think that's sort of where the ethics committee comes in.
and also, and if I didn't give you complete handout and you want one, if you leave me your email, I can send it to you. Right here, I say robots can be made to use words to look as though they understand what's being communicated. This is actually already happening, and that's Alexa and Siri. They're two things you should look up. Who is Alexa? Who is Siri? Most of us probably have. How many of you have Alexa in your home? It's a little sphere.
Few of them.
It's unbelievable. I have Alexa in my house, and suddenly it will start talking to me. How it knows my name, it recognizes my voice and says, Eva. And it will communicate its own interpretation of what I say. It's mind-boggling. I'm not a scientist. I don't know how this non-human intelligence could be created by human intelligence, to go beyond human intelligence. That's an amazing thought to think about. How could we have created something that can supersede our own intelligence? Did you have anything you wanted to say about that, James?
I'm a fly on the wall of this conversation, but I really enjoy hearing about it.
Well, I have another point, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna be quiet.
No, ask me.
No, please, please.
I don't want to monopolize.
No, please, say,
No,
please.
Yes, what is the meaning of maybe what we have to do in every area of all of this is a big thing, and maybe we define what we call intelligence. Because the term, as you all are using it, I'm not sure it's easy for non-scientific, especially outside of the field, to totally understand that.
What intelligence is.
Right, I think maybe what we have to do is redefine or explain it, to include, broaden the definition is what I can say.
Okay, I would say, first of all, the first element of intelligence is we have been given the capacity to perceive what's around us, to be aware of our environment. And then I am not the creator. We can take what we perceive and get aware of and make interconnections. That is an ability that differs within each of us. That's how we're each unique. And that's how things get invented and we go into the future. But you might perceive something, become aware of it, and it might summon up thoughts within you that are different from your previous life experiences. So we each go through life with our own experiences. And hence, when we come across something new, we will interpret it based on our past. And that will just spur some new thought in us. That's the wonder of our minds, that it can take and relate things and interpret them and then actually create. We're creators. Our minds help us be creators. We help create so many things every day in our life. Did you want to add, James?
I think that was a great response to that question. Personally.
Yes?
I would like to look at one aspect that seems to be separate, and that's emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
How we respond to things always are colored by our emotion,
Mhm.
anger, hunger, all this. And I'm thinking, I'm wondering if there's stuff out there right now that touches upon that in AI.
I think among plant life, other living forms, not necessarily human,
I think he's within the AI.
that the other life forms can do what humans cannot necessarily do. So we can learn from other life forms, and we have the capacity to grow from what we see others in. The human mind is wonderful to make associations and make new creations from it. James, did you want to add anything?
I'd be happy to add to that. I think that's a good question. So one of the things that, again, raised the initial question regarding the ethics around AI is, we're still, like crypto, we're still in the wild west of a lot of the AI frontier. And I think what happens with that is the Google DeepMind experiment was a very insightful event in that as I mentioned before, it started to self-actualize, right? So the question is emotional capacity, is EQ and IQ reminiscent of those exact same neurochemical connections, right? Electrochemical connections, and it could be, right? That's the kind of the ever increasing debate in that sphere, because one of the issues that happened was that the AI started to get mad at its asking a question. Let's just say it was using a GPT function, and you're asking a repeated question. It would start to actually get annoyed. Hey, why are you asking the same question? I already told you the answer to this, 3 times ago. And I was like, well, that's not what we initially programmed within the stem of our root programming, right? So that was an interesting case study wherein this artificial intelligence all of a sudden started to build off of this root and started to be able to actually create ancillary code that would give it human-like capability and human-like characteristics, right? So that's again, sparked the debate in some cases. So to answer your question, yes and no, right? It's I think we're sort of in the beginning preliminary genesis of a lot of this stuff, but it's an interesting question, and it's a lot of that's gonna.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
My niece in Israel is a filmmaker, and she recommended a film called I, Mother. Has anybody seen that movie? It's pretty interesting. It was not on my radar, but it's about robots that essentially take over the world. I mean, an old theme. But the new information in it is that they then start breeding a human that loves the robot. So it's like reverse role models. So it's very interesting.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Exactly. Anyway,
Right.
so there's just within the culture, there's always like questioning and analysis and speculation about whether it's creation versus procreation. And in this case, they like are killing all the humans off and then breeding that perfect human that loves the robot versus just looking at a robot as a robot. They want that emotional connection.
Yeah.
So my cat's already figured this out.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Is that kind of like in 2001 Space Odyssey, the HAL 9000?
Yeah.
It's a little bit different, but yeah, that was
Emotional, right.
rejection.
Right. That's exactly
What we loved. Isn't that the underlying theme we all have?
Did anybody get that little acronym for HAL? Did anybody figure that one out?
It's a letter shift.
IBM.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be
Yeah, one
Yeah.
letter shift here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one letter shifted to the right.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. In the
IBM.
next sequence. Yeah, that's right. Or to the left, rather.
No,
Yeah.
no, but one letter over.
Right, one letter over.
Are there any other shared comments? That's why we're all here.
Yeah.
And before I go on, do take my email address because I have so much to share with you and I can respond to you and we can have a dialogue one on
And
one.
she won't she won't make a chat GPT instead. She'll be the real person.
Yes, that's right.
Beyond the hours of 8 p.m., I get outsourced as a chat, right? Thank you for calling Microsoft Tech Support.
She'll just do a version of Eliza with different words.
That's right.
Well, I would like any further comments or the experiences that some of you might have that you'd be willing to share at this time. But once again, we could have a personal dialogue if you contact me. And I can also put you in touch with other people who have more expertise in what you're interested in. So it goes well beyond me. So feel free to take my email address
Very helpful.
and we can have each a one-on-one dialogue, and I could put you in touch with people who would be able to, I have a wide assortment of contacts where I could put you in touch with people that you can interact with and be more expert at delving into a subject that you're interested
That's
in.
great. That's great.